Welcome to ACM's Vault of Cult. My name's Andy. On this episode we focus on 1984's sci-fi cult classic, The Last Starfighter. This is a film that is kind of forgotten in America. It's had a recent Arrow Blu-ray special edition release. I'm focused on this because to me this was one of my favourite films growing up. It has got a bit of a cult following already, but I think it deserves more. I showed it to my mate Dave Kennington, someone I grew up with in a small town in Suffolk, and we both live miles apart now, but because of technology, and we're able to talk about this film over Zoom. He'd never seen it. He's only a couple of years older than me. I'm quite surprised it passed him by, but then when I think about it, it passed a lot of people by. So he watched it, he got it, streamed it on, I think, Amazon Prime. It's got no current hard copy edition available in this country. Hopefully that will change soon, but at least you are able to watch it if you listen to this and want to. But I'm hoping actually a lot of people have already watched it, and we'll just enjoy that other people enjoyed this movie. This is a conversation I had with Dave. Okay, thanks to Dave for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, my friend. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm all right. One of them days that we got there. I've just rewatched the film, The Last Starfighter. Thanks for joining us. This is the first one you've done with us.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And I've known you probably longer than anybody else I've done these podcasts with.
We've known each other since you started primary school. You were in my sister's year, so that would be 36 years, 37 years.
I'm 40 now. So
yeah, probably about 36 years then, I reckon.
36 years. So probably we might have even met the year this film was released, which was 1984.
Probably a little bit after. Let's see. 84 was the year I think I started primary school, so it would have been maybe a year or two after, I think.
Okay, so we'll say we're around the time this came out on video, right? Because it's that old, it had a video release, not Blu-ray or streaming. But just before we get going on The Last Starfighter, just let know. I know you're really into film. Can you name 3 of your favourite films so we get some gist of what you like?
I do find it hard to narrow down specific films because I love so many films for so many reasons. I think if I had to say a film I probably watched the most, it's Aliens. I was a bit of a nutcase, is the only suitable way to describe it as a job. I'd actually get up about 4 a.m. before school, so I could sit and watch my Aliens Extended Edition VHS before I went to high school. Most mornings, or a few other films as well, but mostly it was Aliens. So I love a bit of sci-fi. The Third Man's one of my favourite films. If I had to name one other one, oh Christ on a stick. In Bruges, possibly. Or The Burbs, maybe. Good comfort films.
Yeah. Oh, the Burbs would be a great one to do for this podcast, actually.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And just quickly, any films that you loved as a kid that maybe you haven't watched lately and you think, oh, would I still like it now?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I got a lot of Flight of a Navigator vibes when I watched The Last Starfighter. You can see it was that sort of era of sci-fi adventure, middle America, suburbia sort of films. You know, that was something I used to have on VHS, which I wore out. Trying to think of ones I'm not that fussed about anymore. There aren't too many. Obviously, as you said about before we go on about the Ernest films, some films don't age very well. Like I know I loved Police Academy when I was a kid. You know, I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. But now I watch it and I just think, oh, there's some bits in there that don't really stand up too well. The sort of subtle insinuation that if 2 straight men accidentally walked into a gay bar, they'd end up obstructed from leaving, and then still love you tomorrow, etc., etc.
We mentioned the Ernest films because one of the last podcasts I've done was Ernest Goes to Camp, and that one I do think stands out really well. But since doing that, I've watched some of the others, and there's nothing offensive in them. It's just that kind of broad slapstick I don't think sort of works as well nowadays. But
I was pleasantly. Oh, sorry.
So I was going to say with the Police Academy films, those are strange ones because bits of it I do find really funny. I find the characters likable, but the bit you just mentioned there, it's like it's
so dated, and but still, there's jokes like that in. I hate to mention it, but in say the Nan movie and things like that, what's still being made. So the humor's a strange one.
I haven't. I've no intention of going to see the Nan movie, I have to say.
Yeah,
I wasn't a huge fan of Catherine Tate's comedy show in any case, but
yeah.
That's funny. Yes.
We'll dive into this because I mentioned comedy. I mean, if you look at the director Nick Castle, after this film, he did as well. He'd done the Boy Who Could Fly, which is quite big. But he went on to do a lot of comedy, like Dennis the Menace movie and Major Payne and things like that.
Can I just say, I was so when I watched this film, I was so surprised with the title because I didn't even know he directed. I just know him as Michael Myers.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who don't know, I mean, the film was directed by Nick Castle, who was the original Michael Myers in the first film when he was just called The Shape, wasn't he?
Yeah. The main character's the paramedic from Halloween 2, and his friend is the bad guy from Halloween 3. So there's a nice triple Halloween link there.
There is, yeah, and it's obviously. I think Nick Castle getting people he knows together. If you look at the guy who done the music, whose name escapes me, but he done some of the Halloween stuff and in his later films, and this being the director's only second film, I think it's kind of he's got people together who he trusts. So I think he would have met them on set, and that's just a guess because I think that he was more involved with Halloween than just literally the man in the suit. So no, he wasn't.
No, I think. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the film, you can tell it's not just the age of the film, but the style of it. There's that kind of feel to it, even though it's a totally different film, totally different plot, totally different sort of setting, totally different style. Totally different sort of atmosphere. It's got a very similar style to that era of sort of, I'd say, in semi-independent, maybe low budget film. It's really good.
Yeah, one of the early reviews of it said it was one of the best B movies he'd ever seen. I wouldn't class it as a B movie, but it has that feel. It's higher budget, but it's got that. Often when you think of sci-fi and stuff, you do think B movies, and it wasn't until likes of, like you mentioned earlier, bigger budget ones like Alien and Aliens, where this genre got pushed more accepted, really, more accepted as more highbrow film. Whereas I can totally see that because it's a bit like a feel of a 50s B movie. With the sort of small town that, but we'll just very quickly over the plot. I mean, I'm not going to say we can't do spoilers because it's a very old film. But the gist of it is basically a teenage kind of dreamer who is stuck in a trailer park. Lives with his mum and seems to be doing all the work at the trailer park. He wants to escape. The only thing he seems to enjoy is playing an arcade game, which turns out to be kind of a test. He completes the game and is later taken into space to become a real starfighter, which doesn't sound like that much of an original plot, but probably back then it was.
Totally. I mean, there's nothing like it at the time, as far as I can recall. I mean, obviously there was some influence there, I think, from Tron, maybe. But the idea, I mean, it was kind of nice in a way. It was just this idea of escapism, wasn't it? It was this idea that that sitting around playing a video game isn't necessarily wasting your life. It actually pays him back in some way, and it's like, your skills I recognise. We shall put you to use.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one thing I like about the film is it's kind of, when I first watched it, it seemed really different to all the other sci-fi films I saw. I first watched it, I can remember being very young. My next door neighbour had it on VHS cassette. It was back when, very few films were expensive, so you watch things on TV and then maybe for Christmas you'd get one film, and this was like my neighbour's one film, and I'd always want to watch it with him, and he'd always bring it around, so I watched it a lot, and it felt like a really big film to me. But what I like about it is it seemed different, but watching it now, there's so many elements from other big franchises. There's a lot of Star Wars in there. Even when you think about it, it's almost like when you see him in the trailer park at the beginning, it's much like when you see Luke for the first time in Star Wars.
Yeah. One of the things I picked up on was it's got that same kind of character journey, hasn't it? You've got the Luke character, which is him. You've got then the mentor character, which is Centauri, who then dies, and then, and then he has refusal of the call, and he steps up, and all that stuff George Lucas talked about ad nauseum. You know, it's all in there. It's all in there, definitely.
And visually, I mean, especially the sort of villains in it remind me very much of the 1980 Flash Gordon. A lot of it.
Yeah, like that, same here. I thought the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And even some Star Trek in there with some of it. But the title sequence,
it almost looked like the inside of a Klingon vessel, the enemy one, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the title sequence is Star Wars, basically. Not Star
Wars and Superman.
Superman's what I meant. So yeah, Superman, which reminded me. Recently, I rewatched Master of the Universe, which is exactly the same sort of intro. The music sounds like it, and more Superman than Star Wars. But basically, it sounds like John Williams, even though it isn't. And the way the credits move. Yeah, but I love the music in it. It's got that orchestral sound, and that to me sounds timeless, but it's also very 80s.
Yeah, it reminded me actually when I first put it in and I first watched the music. Obviously, it goes into a very, I'd say, sort of 3/4 John Williams, 1/4 Jerry Goldsmith style musical score.
Yeah.
And then, but the actual opening, the first minute or so, it actually reminded me of Life Force. It was that kind
of. Yeah. Life Force. Now there's a film. I watched that quite recently. That's for anyone listening who doesn't know. That's the Toby Hooper sci-fi, isn't it? Which it's not one I love, but that's one of those I think could be an amazing film.
It was such an undertaking, I think, wasn't it? It was this epic film which starts off as a sort of subtle alien style sci-fi film and goes into like a sort of hunt for a serial killer and ends up being a bloody zombie movie. It's bonkers, but I love it. I think it's brilliant.
I love canon films in the mid-80s anyway, and that was one of the good ones.
That was one where they really experimented with trying to spend a lot of money on films, and unfortunately, it didn't pay off for them. But it was one of their higher budget ones.
But that's one where, a bit like this film, I think that it's sort of more fondly remembered now. It's sort of over time people have appreciated it, and with this film, I mean, looking at it got quite good reviews. It done okay at the box office, but then it was kind of forgotten. And more recently, with the anniversaries and Comic-Cons and stuff, people seem to, I think a lot of people watched it like me as a kid over and over on video. It was about 4 years ago, I went to a Comic-Con and Nick Castle and the two main stars, Lance Guest and Catherine Mary Stewart, were there. And I thought it was really nice, but I also thought it was kind of strange that a film that isn't commercially available in this country in any sort of hard format, and there's still because you rented this on Amazon, didn't you, to watch it?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and my knowledge of film in my life never really paid it much of a mind. I certainly didn't know the plot. I think I'd probably seen the VHS case back in the day in video stores, but I never really knew what it was. Just knew it existed.
Yeah.
And as you say, I didn't. As I say, I didn't know Nick Castle was a director, let alone that he directed this. Catherine Stewart, is it? I only really know from Night of the Comet.
Yeah,
that's the only other film of hers I've seen, which I also love. And obviously Lance Guest. Funnily enough, I first knew him from Jaws of Revenge.
Yeah,
that was one of my first VHSs. I think somebody I said I wanted Jaws for Christmas, and I think somebody bought me Jaws for Revenge, and I thought, I love sit with this one. But he's actually brilliant, and I love pretty much anything he's in. He's in my favourite werewolf film, Late Phases. He's a great actor.
Yeah, I kind of feel sorry for him because he carries this film really well. Considering there's some great character actors around him, and he's really young at the time and just so likable. But this and Halloween 2, which I'll probably say is my least favourite Halloween film, and Jaws 4, which is up there with if people have to name one of the worst films of all time, it's always there. I don't think it's quite that bad, but it's certainly not very good.
As a schlocky sort of monster movie, it's sort of average and passable, but I think because it tries to cash in on the name of easily Steven Spielberg's greatest film, you know, and one of the best films of all time. It's kind of, don't take the fucking piss, come on.
Yeah, exactly. But saying about Jaws, I mean, the beginning of this film as well reminds me a lot of Spielberg, especially sort of Poltergeist, that sort of vibe.
I was watching because after I watched the film for the first time, I watched a few of the, because I love film retrospectives on YouTube, and there's some really good ones out there. And I watched one, I think it was by Oliver Harper, and he was saying the original setting for it was a sort of out of town suburban LA area, but I think Nick Castle made the deliberate choice to change it to a trailer park to kind of pull away from Poltergeist and E.T. and all that stuff, you know. So and it worked. It fed into the story, because the trailer park is actually almost a character in itself. You know, it's where these people have this very small community, which you wouldn't have even if it was set in a cul-de-sac or something, which I think works really well with the characters. Yeah,
I just love the way that the opening sort of sequence is shot. Just little things like you see the dog asleep and a cat come out of the mailbox, and it's very 80s, but without obviously looking that in a strange way. And then you've got the sort of quirky, like older characters, like the lady listening to a Walkman, listening to some then really modern music. It's got that feel good factor, which is something I think is lost since 80s and possibly early 90s. I think they try now, but it kind of feels more sincere back then, even though it probably wasn't, because it was just a dumb thing.
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, one of my favourite bits was just the bit where he's looking up at that mobile on the ceiling, and he just hears and he mouths the conversations of his neighbours outside, because he's heard that conversation 100 times, reinforcing how he wants to escape, even though he's quite close to his community. But as in terms of how sincere it is, I don't know. I found myself thinking as I was watching it the first time, you know, has this, you know, is this a really good story, or is it a cynical sort of, oh, the kids are into video games, let's stick that out there and see what happens? But I think I'd probably tend towards the former, to be honest. I think it has got a lot of heart. It's just a nice story about, as I say, escapism, about, you know, breaking away from routine tradition, you know, the bit where Catherine Mary Stewart says goodbye to her gran at the end, you know, it's quite nice stuff, you know. I don't think and it's not too sentimental either. It's just nice. It's got a bit of heart to it, you know.
It's not it's not sort of cheesy sentimental. It does, and it does seem very of that era. But I'm comparing it to, and people will, you know, the bigger, more well-known films from that era. One thing I just watching quickly a bit of one of the making ofs, and they tried really hard to get it away from E.T. as possible, because that was, E.T. came out 2 years before this, 3 years, and was just so big they didn't want to be seen as cashing in on that. And I know for a fact that you had the film, John Carpenter film, Starman.
I love that film. 78, wasn't it? Yeah, that's a good film.
Well, that was pushed back. They had the script ready and stuff. That was pushed back because of E.T. So they I think that was, in the end, it came out in about 1985.
Really?
I think so. I'll have a check.
I thought Starman was earlier than that. I didn't realise. Okay.
It was definitely after ET, because both scripts were around at the same time. And then they wouldn't make it because of that coming out. I will double check that, because I know.
No, you're probably right. No. It's very easy to get films around that era mixed up. So no, but Starman, it's a great film. It's one of those, one of the best films you never realised John Carpenter directed.
It's 1984. That came out the same year as this. So, I mean, it's a really good sort of era for almost family sci-fi films when you look at it. And I do think this one kind of overlooked. I think we mentioned how it looks like other films. A lot of the ships and stuff look like even Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers, that sort of thing, which is a few years.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I think that the effects and makeup are really good, but it's really early CGI. So to me, a lot of it looks, early. Some of it just looks like, when you watch a documentary now and you have the CGI before it's finished, a lot of the stuff in space looks like that, which now I think does look really dated. But you've got to think, this film's 28 years old now.
God, I wouldn't like to think what those effects cost to produce at the time, because they must have used the most hardcore computers in the world to produce those, because there was nothing else like it, was there? No. You can sort of see it leading into this effects that became things like Babylon 5 and Star Trek Next Generation and things like that. It's it was quite remarkable. I can imagine people being blown away by it at the time, but it does look pretty janky now.
But yeah, I mean, it looks to me like the sci-fi effects in, say, TV, but 10 years later, when you mentioned Babylon 5.
Yeah,
and it's a bit, it looks better, but it's not unlike early Red Dwarf special effects when you see the actual spaceships.
Was it Red Dwarf?
Red Dwarf would have been, what, 5-10 years later?
Are you talking because because originally it was all practical effects, but then they re-released them on VHS, didn't they, with really shitty looking CGI instead of excellent Peter Ragg practical effects. You know, the guy who did Captain Scarlet, and he did all his meticulous spaceships, fantastic space battles, and then they re-released it with this really cheap shit basically laid over top of it.
But some of the like practical makeup effects in this, which I think look really good. And I think if it was made now, I don't think they could have done any better. When there's a almost subplot where, because he goes into space, they send a sort of droid down to Earth to replace it, and there's some some scenes where it's turning into him, which for a PG kids film, it could scare a kid quite a bit. But
that bit when a blanket comes off head, I can imagine if a little kid was watching that, they'd scream. I mean, but again, going back to what made those films of that era so good, you don't get that kind of thing now. There's not that element of darkness to it. I mean, there's a scene in it where like a guy captured, tortured, and his head's drilled into, isn't it? You know, and this is like a PG kids sci-fi adventure, but that little element of darkness, I think, it elevated a lot of 80s films to that. It's why we still remember them fondly. I mean, I can't think of kids films that were specifically really aimed at kids that quite carry the same weight, because you can't identify with that part of it, you know.
It's quite unoffensive, apart from little bits what would scare people. And I always sort of think, when I do these podcasts, I mean, is there anything in it you think they wouldn't do nowadays? Because I can think of one thing personally.
As I say, those two scenes probably not, done in a different way, maybe. Trying to think if there's anything specific plot-wise that might change. I mean, it's quite. I suppose
not really plot-wise, but the thing what I noticed watching again today is the sort of comedy little brother character has got a collection of Playboys.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah,
I don't think they'd have that anymore. And I rewatched the Monster Squad recently and done one of these for it, and there's a lot of that sort of humor in that. And then when that came out, in this country at least, that was a 15, even though it was meant to be a kids film. So there's a little bit of light swearing on but that's the only thing I think that I just don't think they dare do now, even though little kids probably would look at stuff like that. Excuse me.
Pornography, what are you talking about?
but to me that makes it a little bit realer, you know. In a lot of kids films, the kids are all too nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the little brother in this is a little shit as well, which
he's that kind of little character. One of those kids that is. I mean, I was listening to George Rockwell Schmidt podcast a little while back, and there's this bit where he says, you know, what one thing you could do to improve episode 1 of Star Wars is just every time the kid who plays Anakin opens his mouth, the nearest adult just has to slap him.
Very true. But I'm just trying to think of
annoying squeaky kids. I don't know why Hollywood executives thought they needed to be injected into every single film back then, but they don't last well.
No, I mean that character is a bit cliche, but I always think it's kind of, for when a kid's watching a film like this, if they've got a brother or sister, they'll think that brother or sister is the most annoying person in the world. So I think it is put in to make the viewer relate to it a bit more.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point. Yeah, I don't really think of it like that. Yeah, no, that might be what it is. Yeah. I mean, you've got this dynamic between them, as you mentioned about the comedy side of it. You know, when that replacement, what's he called? A meta something. I'm a meta something. Anyway, when he's there, the interactions between him and the little brother are funny as hell. You know, they're some of the best scenes in the film. You're having a terrible nightmare.
There's the scene where because the little brother basically sees him with his head off, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's repairing his ear because his ears malfunction. He takes his head off, plonks it on the desk, he's fiddling away with it.
Yeah, which is a great scene, and it's one of those. It's not an out and out comedy, of course, but it's much like a Spielberg film with there's humor in there. And one of my favorite comedy scenes is when it's there's a campfire scene with we'll call it a droid with Catherine Mary Stewart, and he's basically repeating what he overhears another couple saying, and he says things like those other girls,
friend,
the other girls meant nothing and things like that, and it's just you get so confused, and that's I like that because it almost sort of turns it into a bit of a teen comedy, opposed to
one of the things that I picked up in a documentary about it was they were saying that a lot of the double parts for comedy parts were added for comic relief later. They were refilmed actually with Lance Guest wearing a wig because he'd cut his hair for another role. And normally when that kind of thing happens, it can adversely affect film. But I actually really enjoyed those scenes. I'm glad they did that because I thought Lance Guest has a really good talent for comedy.
Yeah.
And those scenes are the ones where they really stand out, so I'm glad they added those.
Yeah, so about his talent for comedy. I met him at that Comic-Con I mentioned, and he was just one of these who you could tell he had a sense of humor. He was laughing away with people. And I think he genuinely loved that he was in this film. And just the vibe of him was he's so pleased that people still talk about it. And I could hear him saying to people sort of jokingly, don't mention the sequel, because that's something that he's been asked for about 40 years. And if you Google that, there's still loads of, it might still happen. I think that would be a big mistake. But it's when I see something like that, I'm like, it's great that he's sort of come to peace with this, so to speak. But he should have gone on to be a big star, I think. And I think Catherine Mary Stewart probably went on to be the bigger name out of it, even though she never got massive. Because you said you'd only seen Night of the Comets. She was in Weekend at Bernie's as well, which was a fairly big film.
Okay, I have seen that, but not for 30 odd years, I think. So.
Yeah. Do you remember the bit where he gets kicked in the balls? That was funny. Sorry. But yeah, so I think she's gone on to do a lot of TV and stuff. But the comic side definitely helps it, because I think when you're watching a film like this as an adult, or if you're watching it with kids, if there's genuine laughs in it, it just makes it more enjoyable for everybody.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of more recent kids films I can think of that aren't very funny and very forgettable. And then when you look at, say, things like Pixar, they put so many jokes in for the adults. I think that reason they get so well reviewed and stuff. And
it's not a chore to sit through when you're in the cinema with your kid. You can actually just laugh along with it and get the jokes that your kids don't get. But that's a reference to a film from 20 years ago that you didn't watch because you weren't born.
Yeah, I was remember when I was quite young. I was too young to have seen Pulp Fiction, but I had. And then Space Jam came out about 2 years later, and they referenced that in that. And it just sort of made me think that's pretty cool, because they're referencing this 18 certificate film in a U certificate film. It's obviously thrown in for, or just encourages kids to watch Pulp Fiction. So good.
Well, I'd like to think so. I think that's the way we should be going.
A few more things I picked up on just rewatching it today. I mean, I thought it was really cool that the main sort of vehicle, what's the name of the character that Robert Peterson plays? The sort of Obi-Wan type, as you referenced.
Oh, Centaur.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he actually drives what looks like a DeLorean, and
it's a weird kind of DeLorean box. It's a cross between DeLorean and a Fiat Panda, is what I thought when I saw it, to be honest. But because that's a very interesting guy. And he was, as I say, a great character. I went through a whole thing though, thinking he was a different actor. I swore blind the first time I watched it. Oh, that's the guy who played Matlock, isn't it? And I looked up. No, it's not. No.
he was in so many films. But the Music Man is what he's most well known for, I reckon. But yeah, 76 credits he was in. But I just found it interesting that there's a DeLorean like pre Back to the Future, and people would watch this now probably thinking it was ripping Back to the Future off.
Yeah, especially as I'm not sure, but it looked like they actually filmed part of it in the same tunnel. There's that famous tunnel in Los Angeles that's used in like every Robert Zemeckis film, a little 2-lane short one just on the outskirts of California. It does. Yeah, I can imagine people would think that. Yeah, but that was, as you say, a year before Back to the Future came out.
Yeah, so we'll say Back to the Future ripped this off. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also, I thought there was a bit of Terminator going on with the other alien sent back, so sent down to Earth to get him.
Yeah, actually, a pre-Terminator 2 T-1000. Essentially, it was a shapeshifter, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So that probably just ripped off the Outer Limits like James Cameron did.
Yeah. That's it. The episode.
Yeah.
Of Cat.
But it did remind me of that, and a bit. If you remember the sort of was it Tracers as well? That was filmed around the same time.
Oh, Tracers, that's one I've got on Blu-ray, but I haven't got around to watching yet.
Worth a watch. It's very low budget. I think that was one of Helen Hunt's first films.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I saw she's in it. Yeah.
That's really enjoyable, low budget. And with this, I mean, we said about the special effects. I mean, it only had a 15 million budget, which then I know is a lot more than that, but that's not massive, is it?
It's by no means a big budget for the time.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, the makeup effects, they're perhaps a little more stilted than, say, Star Wars, but they look damn good. Dan O'Herlihy, I wouldn't have if I hadn't seen his name in credits, I wouldn't have known it was him. The voice is obviously very familiar, but because I've never seen him play a jovial character before, so in fact he's just made up to look like this giant turd. Yeah. It's just it's amazing, and all the little ancillary characters, they all look funny. I'm not sure what's going on with everybody having the same sort of weird scientist hairdo and big hair, but that was bizarre.
You said that you wouldn't recognise him. I mean, I didn't realise till probably a few years ago because he's the main villain. Well, kind of main villain, the old man. RoboCop, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, shooting son. What's your name?
Yeah,
that's him. Yeah.
And
Halloween 3 as well.
And he's so likable in this. Where I've only ever seen him as villain.
I've never seen him play. He sometimes plays jovial characters with a sinister undercurrent, like in Halloween 3, Twin Peaks, and things like that.
Yeah.
But normally he's just an out-and-out villain, isn't he? And I think his son passed away last year as well, didn't he? Gavin O'Herlihy.
Oh,
the guy who played what's his name in Superman 3, the pisshead. Oh, I forget his name now.
The Superman.
The small town hit guy from Smallville.
Oh yeah.
Security guard. Yeah, that's his son, Gavin O'Herlihy.
Okay,
So he's one of those actors who pops up on British television a lot when you need a vaguely American sounding accent. But he passed away this year.
Yeah. I didn't realise that. Superman 3 one I actually really like, because mainly I like Richard Pryor. But,
of course.
But an interesting little story I read as well, that when Robert Pattinson met him on set, he was in full makeup. He'd never met him before. And he just said, I knew that as you've got that familiar face. And I think that annoyed him a little bit. But there you go. Who knows if that story is true or not. But it was Robert Pattinson's last film as well. I don't want to say Patterson, I mean Preston, don't I? So I'm going to see Batman.
I was going to say, I was hang on, was he?
I'm not to see Batman later. So every time I've said Robert Patterson, I meant Robert Preston. But I think I've only said it wrong twice.
You only said it once before, but I think I got what you meant.
As long as our listener gets it. But this is one of these, we do it as a conversation. There's no edits. So any mistakes,
free flow.
Stay in. I did a podcast on a film called The Mighty Peking Man recently, and several times I called it The Mighty Peking King. Just to me, that's got a ring to it. But yeah, so every time I said Robert Preston, that's who I meant, not Robert Pattinson. Does that make sense?
You're kind of there.
Yeah. But yeah,
what do you want to sort of swipe that, reverse it, or whatever it is.
Yeah, people will know what we mean. The whole cast in general are really good, but it's only sort of the sort of main 4 or 5 for. There's not like saying Star Wars, you've got your Han Solos and that sort of thing. It's basically hero's girlfriend, 2 aliens. Then the rest all sort of blend into one.
Pretty much, yeah. You got your archetypal bad guy with a British accent.
Yeah.
Then your warrior bad guys, and that's about it, isn't it? And I like the fact that the bad guy was sort of just basically motivated by daddy issues. That made me laugh.
Yeah.
It's like this really over the top bad guy who's just got daddy issues, and it's still better than Alien Covenant, which had the same thing. But
yeah. Don't mention that ever again.
That film doesn't exist in my head. That film is not canon.
No, it should have been good though.
It should have been. I was expecting it. I thought, okay, so they didn't wrap up Prometheus the way they were supposed to. They got somebody in to rewrite the end so they could maybe make a sequel. This one's got actually have the alien in it, so maybe they'll do it right this time. And it's like, oh, the Lovecraftian lore of the previous films. Nope, the alien was invented by a maladjusted robot with paternal issues and a vague understanding of philosophy. Yeah.
I think that's the only alien film I've ever seen once.
Oh, literally, I bought it on Blu-ray, and I own all the Alien films, not the Alien vs Predator ones, obviously. But I bought it on Blu-ray and took it to Computer Exchange the next day.
I saw it in the cinema, and then still bought it on Blu-ray, but I haven't watched it because I'm a nerd and have to have all the Alien films. So, apart from Alien vs Predator, which I've got on CEX secondhand DVDs for about £1.
Oh, that's all right.
So I sort of watched them again, like they couldn't be that bad, and the second one was even worse when I watched it again.
It's awful.
Yeah. So
they turn the alien into Michael Myers. It's a weird fucking
yeah. So we sort of covered the special effects, it just in general. I mean, you sort of agree the plot kind of it works. It's not that original, but then it is. If that makes sense, it's almost like a new take on the old cliches.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, it had its similarities to other films at the time. It follows the sort of what I can't remember. There's a specific writer who named it, but that sort of, as I say, the protocol of what a hero's journey should be. I sometimes disagree when some critics get a bit sniffy. Oh, you didn't follow the hero's journey. Well, you can do your own journey. You don't have to do it exactly as that. But it did that, and it did it really well, in my opinion. And it did it in the context of a kid playing video games who's recruited into this enormous battle that matters and will someday affect Earth. And I can imagine if I had seen it as a kid, I probably would have loved it, because I'd have sat there with my Commodore 64. I spent far too much time playing video games as a kid, just started watching movies. I think I'd have loved it. And I think that's a nice, I wouldn't say aspirational, but it's kind of a reassuring thing for a kid to see.
Yeah,
that the things they're interested in aren't just a joke. I like that scene where the old guys are all crowding around the arcade cabinet. that perhaps was the biggest stretch of the imagination, not the aliens or the Space Wars, but the fact that anyone over the age of 30 in the 1980s gave a shit about video games.
So, do you think, is there a reason why you never watched this growing up, or did it just literally pass you by? Was there no reason, nothing put you off it or anything?
No, not at all. No, it just, I mean, obviously 84, I'd have been 5, so I wouldn't have been renting films myself. I suspect it was probably one of those Saturday afternoon films if it was on TV a lot, so I don't know, but it must have just passed me by. I just don't think, as I say, I'm familiar with the case. I didn't really recognise it as anything to do with me. I'm trying to think what the original case looked like. It was him looking up at the sky with the ship behind him, wasn't it?
That's it, yeah.
And I just looked at, it's a sort of sci-fi thing, probably a bit Buck Rogers-y, that kind of stuff. Never really, if I'd known about video games, I'd have been on that shit like a motherfucker.
Yeah. I think it has kind of been just sort of put with the Star Wars rip-offs. I think that's one thing that a lot of sci-fi films. Well, yeah, there were so many Star Wars rip-offs.
Oh, well, Battlestar Galactica was actually obviously just a sort of shameless attempt to make a Star Wars series without buying the Star Wars license. And
then there was it, Star Crash. Have you seen that one with David Hasselhoff?
Yeah, Roger Corman one, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I haven't seen it. I think I've seen a retrospective about it though. But
there's so many, and I think sometimes the good ones get overshadowed.
Battle Beyond the Stars and all those ones.
Yeah. So and also it's sort of towards the tail end of that, because the last Star Wars film then was 1982, wasn't it? In with Return of the Jedi, and this came 2 years after. So then saying that, I mean, Mel Brooks spoofed Star Wars in 86, didn't he? So many years later,
Spaceballs.
Yeah, it was great. But
so I think actually you mentioned it. That's one film I loved as a kid that I think I rewatched about 5 years ago, and it just didn't hit my funny bone the same way it did when I was a kid. A lot of Mel Brooks' stuff does stand. Blazing Saddles is still one of my favourite films ever. I think it's a great comedy. But Spaceballs, I don't think I laughed once when I rewatched it. That's really sad.
I think I rewatched it. I've rewatched it twice recently. Well, say recently in the last 10 years. Once I was pretty much the same, but put it down to I knew what jokes were coming. But then I watched it at a rock festival. There was like after all the bands, they put it on the big screen, and everyone roared with laughter, and I was laughing with them. But I think it was the same thing. It was like you knew the joke, so you was like going along with it.
Also, I think I watched it sober, which I think if I watch it now as an adult, I need to do it with a few bellies and a couple of shots of bourbon in my stomach. Yeah.
I like the way you
because I watch the cheesiest films when I'm drunk. I'll stick any old crap on.
I just like the way that I'm at rock festivals. You assume I was very drunk, which I was. So yeah,
I watched Man Off the Hands of Fate the other night. That's how drunk I was.
I never remember films when I'm drunk. So and just sort of wrap things up. I'm guessing from what you've said, you'd recommend it to people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good, solid, fun sci-fi adventure film. I think your kids might like it. They might find it a bit cheesy, but it's just an enjoyable film, and it's got a lot of heart. I liked it.
Yeah, I think as well with the video games thing, maybe youngsters would be interested a bit more because the video games are a much bigger thing now than they were then. Because it was sort of just taken off.
Because 84, that would have been like the arse end of the Atari sort of come down, wouldn't it? So they were at that weird trough before the 8-bit computers started up, but after the Atari had kind of died a death. So it might have just been a matter of timing.
That's
it
true.
came out 2 years earlier, 2 years later, maybe it would have taken off a bit more.
I think it came out like just before sort of Mario, so it was just before the NES and stuff. But arcades were a big thing then. So that's what it's getting at. But now I think a lot of people might be interested in just because like retro is a big thing now, like things I've been going to like this geek retreat, and there's things like that where people can sit and play old games. Who knows? I mean, if I think that's why there's talk of there could still be some sort of sequel happen.
I mean, the 80s nostalgia wave, I don't think is quite over yet. It's starting to transition into 90s nostalgia, but it's still there. People still love it, I think we've got things like Stranger Things and a lot of stuff that followed that to really thank for that. And it's not a bad thing, it's nice, some of it's a bit rose tinted. As a kid who grew up in the 80s, I can say it wasn't quite as wacky as some of the new stuff seems to suggest. But
yes, it wasn't. I always see that a lot of people think the 80s was just like you go into a coffee shop and it'd be like Saved by the Bell,
Yes.
And it really was.
Like somebody said on Twitter, didn't they? They said, "Oh, these guys failed to capture how brown everything was back then."
Yeah, very true. And just really quickly, rating out of 5 for this.
Oh, give it a 4 out of 5. Solid 4 out of 5.
So that's about what. I've done a letterbox rating of it, and I gave 4.5. But as a kid, I'd have probably given it a 5 or 6 because I was like that. But it's got on Letterboxd itself out of 5. It's actually got 3.2, which is probably higher than what it would get. And at IMDb, it's got 6.7. So that's out of 10. And 76 on Rotten Tomatoes, which is good for Rotten Tomatoes.
Talk about all middling around the above average to good area, isn't it?
So,
that's not too bad.
That's kind of cool. It's just one of those that the fact that you'd not seen it or knew much about it, sort of, that's my point about this film. I think it's one of those that when people watch it, they do actually really like it, but it's gone under the radar. And who knows, maybe if my next door neighbor hadn't got that video cassette of it, it might have gone under the radar for me as well.
Yeah, and it was one of your favourite films when you were a kid, and you'd have missed out on all that. So it's funny. I mean, it's probably it must seem such a strange concept now. We've got streaming, we've got online downloads, all that business, that you're so reliant on this shitty bit of plastic being released in order to be able to actually experience a film. It seems so archaic now. I think it was Matt Murray on one of his Cornbone Flicks videos was saying about The Empire Strikes Back. He's saying, because for Stranger Things, Blu-ray set came out with a mock VHS case, didn't it? And he said, if it was actually one, you'd hate it. This is my copy of The Empire Strikes Back. It cost me $80. It didn't come out until years after the film came out in the cinema, and it's really bad quality. It's like it was just luck that you happen to have one next door.
We better wrap things up. But one thing I will mention,
Yeah, sure.
which I should have said, have you seen? Talk about the 80s nostalgia. Have you seen the British horror Censor? What came out last year?
Censor? No, I don't think I have.
It's about someone who works for the classification board. There's a horror set around that.
Oh, that could be interesting. Yeah.
Around the Video Nasties era, and you've just reminded me. It's very brown. I think they've got the 80s feel right. It's British and brown.
Authenticity. It matters.
Yeah.
So it's not like an axe wielding Mary Whitehouse or some shit like that.
You're not too far off it. I recommend that. Right, I think we should wrap it up. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for doing the podcast, and hopefully we'll get you back for another one if you're up for it.
Yeah, definitely. Message me and we'll sort of film out and
because
I'll give it a watch. Go for it.
This is the first one we've done post lockdown on Zoom. And I feel a bit uncomfortable on Zoom. I feel like I'm in a business meeting or something. But I think it went alright. Apart from me getting the
It's my second Zoom meeting today, so I've adapted to it now.
Yeah. I can't really do Zoom for my work because I run a pub.
Virtual dream.
Excellent. So thanks a lot. And
thanks for inviting me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant.
I'm really pleased he enjoyed that. I enjoyed the conversation. Great to catch up over film. We had a little bit of a conversation afterwards, but not much. But we will get him back soon, as you just heard. And more films coming up in future episodes of this podcast. We're about halfway through the second season. That's gone really quickly. I'm not too sure what we'll be doing next. Two films I am looking into doing are 1990s Dick Tracy, the Warren Beatty movie that featured Madonna. Kind of forgotten, really good cast that one had. And I think with the Batman film coming out, maybe that's possibly a good time to do that. And hopefully I'll be doing Pump Up the Volume as well, the Christian Slater teen drama. And I've got a DJ who's interested in doing that film with me, who hasn't seen it. Of course, that film's about a DJ. And thanks for listening. Follow us on all the socials, the Instagram, the Facebook, all that sort of thing. Please get in contact if you want to discuss any of the films we've chatted about, or any suggestions, or just want to talk film in general. The weirder the better, but I don't know, that wasn't that much of an uncommercial film, I think. So anyway, thank you very much. I've been Andy, and I'll be back with another episode hopefully fairly soon.